They made a black janitor mop the stage while they handed out awards, then laughed as his name was never called. He stood silent, his dark skin and quiet eyes reflecting a room full of executives who looked through him like he was part of the floor they walked on. No one asked who he was. No one cared. They joked about his slowness, about the way he kept that tattered notebook tucked beside his cleaning supplies, about how he never spoke unless spoken to. They saw his uniform, not his worth. But what none of them realized was that every sneer, every cruel whisper, every quiet act of erasure was being written down, not just by memory, but in a way that would expose them all. This isn't just a story about racism in the workplace. It's about a system built on appearance, and the day it finally shattered. You don't want to miss this. Like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what you think the twist will be. Because trust me, everything you think you know is about to change. The morning sunlight poured across the east-facing side of the Regalia Industries headquarters, coating its vast marble floors in pale gold that made even the sterile lobby seem warm for a moment. Inside, the noise of dress shoes on polished stone echoed softly, executives moving with the same rhythm and silent urgency of trained performers, practiced in power. Everyone knew where they fit in the hierarchy. Some fit comfortably. Others, like Ellis Granger, were reminded daily where they did not. Ellis arrived through the service entrance, the one adjacent to the freight elevator where the trash bins were kept, his janitorial badge flashing briefly under the flickering sensor light as the door slid open. He pushed a squeaky-wheeled cart loaded with cleaning agents, rolled towels, and a dented mop bucket. His uniform was regulation gray, freshly laundered, but marked at the sleeves with fraying edges. On his left breast pocket, a cloth name patch, LSG, was stitched unevenly, as if someone had applied it without much care. The man himself was lean, middle-aged, unremarkable in build, but composed in posture, a quiet kind of calm that made him invisible to most. What they noticed more often was the notebook he kept with him, leather-bound and weathered, pages already marked with fine penmanship and notations no one had yet bothered to read. By 9 a.m., he was on the 42nd floor, executive level, mopping the hallway outside conference room, Omega. Inside, voices buzzed in preparation for the quarterly financial briefing. Ellis didn't pay them attention. His hands moved with mechanical precision, lifting dirt from the tile grooves one circle at a time. But he wasn't fast enough for Langston Dyer. Langston came striding out of the conference room at 9:04. His deep blue suit almost as sharp as the judgment in his eyes. He was tall, lean, and square-jawed with a smile designed to charm clients and gut subordinates at the same time. His presence was loud, even when silent. As he approached, his polished Oxford shoes stopped short of the wet floor sign. His gaze fell to Ellis, then to the bucket, and then back to Ellis. Without saying a word, he stepped forward deliberately and kicked the edge of the mop bucket. It didn't tip, but water splashed up the side and caught Ellis's pant leg. Langston made a sound like he was clearing his throat, but it could have passed for a chuckle. Ellis remained still. He did not look up. Langston spoke anyway, loud enough for the two interns behind him to hear. "That streak's still there," he muttered with performative irritation. "Maybe we need someone who knows the difference between a mop and a paintbrush." One of the interns, a pale kid with gelled hair and an oversized badge, laughed too loud, desperate for approval. Ellis turned slowly, reached for a fresh rag, and resumed his work without acknowledgement. Moments later, as Langston entered the elevator, he quipped, "Next time, don't forget to polish the baseboards." The clients notice everything. The doors slid shut to another round of snickering. By mid-morning, the operations floor had joined in. Coffee cups began appearing in hallways just after Ellis cleaned them. Waste baskets would be emptied right after he left a section, as if on cue. Sticky notes began appearing on his cart with messages like "try harder," and "invisible is not equal to irreplaceable." One morning, someone filled a spray bottle with vinegar and swapped it with his glass cleaner. When he sprayed it onto the meeting room window, the stench spread like a fire alarm, and he was reprimanded by floor management. He took the write-up without protest. That Friday, Ellis entered the canteen at 12:43 p.m., like he always did. The staff meal line was long, and most avoided eye contact as he queued at the end. He selected a sandwich with too much bread and not enough meat, a small fruit cup, and a boxed water. As he stepped forward to pay, the cashier glanced at his badge and sighed theatrically. "Housekeeping discounts not valid at peak lunch hour," she said. "Rules." Ellis didn't respond. He handed over exact change. As he turned to leave, someone called out from one of the back tables, "Hey Ellis, write that in your notebook. New regalia policy. Janitors eat last." Laughter rang out. He didn't flinch. He never did. He sat near the emergency exit, flipped open the notebook, and scribbled something down. He always wrote after these moments. No one knew what. That made them nervous. By the end of week 3, he was assigned to clean the executive restroom after hours, a room with touchless everything and floor tiles so expensive they weren't to be scrubbed with anything stronger than imported microfiber. On his second night, he found the faucets running when he entered. Toilet paper had been unraveled into the sink, lights blinking on and off. Hand soap smeared across the mirror in zigzag patterns. Above the mirror, scrawled in thick black permanent marker, was the phrase, "Janitor justice doesn't pay." He cleaned it all, quietly. No complaints. No security report. By Monday, they'd taken to rearranging his cleaning supplies. The mop was found duct-taped to the elevator wall. The rags stuffed into air vents. A lemon-scented deodorizer cube melted inside his mailbox. Someone even changed his locker label from E. Granger to Ego Garbage. The building's security camera system had conveniently lost footage of all incidents. The custodial supervisor offered only a shrug. Ellis made no appeal. He never missed a shift, never called in sick, never responded to the smirks or insults or laughter when he passed through the halls. Some said he was slow-witted. Others said he was harmless. A few whispered he might not even speak English. On Wednesday, during an internal meeting held in the glass-walled common room, the quarterly board materials were accidentally left on display in the overhead projector. Ellis, waiting near the back to polish the wood trim, made no sound as slides flicked across the screen, showing figures, budget misallocations, employee restructuring data, and inconsistencies in operations costs. The executives barely noticed him. They never did, until Friday. That day, the CEO made an unscheduled visit to the 42nd floor. Ellis was scrubbing the grout by the conference entrance when the chief executive passed. Someone had done this with care. This wasn't a plumbing fault. It was a game. Ellis rolled up his sleeves, adjusted the pressure, and finished the task with no complaint. The mirror, which had been pristine the night before, now bore a handprint in what looked like toothpaste and shaving cream. Written beside it with a fingertip was a crude caricature of a janitor bent under the weight of a mop shaped like a cross. Ellis stared at it for a second, then wiped it clean. No photos, no reaction, only his notebook, where he scribbled something under the date and moved on. At 6:45 a.m., the first of the upper-tier associates began arriving. The executive floor always came alive before the others. It buzzed with a different energy, one made of performance and pretense. Ellis had just stepped out of the restroom when a door nearby opened abruptly, nearly hitting his cart. Marissa Vallon, head of brand imaging, came out balancing a latte and 2 folders. She stopped short, her eyes narrowing the instant she saw him. Her lip curled, the scent of citrus air freshener on his cart irritating her nose. Without a word, she grabbed a tissue from her bag and waved it slightly in front of her face as she passed. Moments later, as Ellis returned to the janitorial closet, he found a note stuck to the cart. Next time, maybe bring a real scent, like relevance. It was written on one of the brand department's signature note cards, complete with the company's embossed emblem. Ellis folded it neatly, tucked it into his notebook, and resumed mopping. Just before 8 a.m., a commotion started near the break lounge. Someone had spilled an entire pot of coffee across the tile floor. The brown puddle stretched across 10 feet, seeping into the seams beneath the vending machine. Ellis arrived quickly, only to find Sean Geller and his fellow intern, Devin Marks, leaning against the wall, sipping replacement drinks. They watched Ellis with lazy curiosity, as though waiting for an animal to perform a trick. Sean tilted his cup toward the mess and asked, with no sincerity, if it was safe to walk across. Devin followed up with a loud whisper about hazard pay for emotional discomfort. As Ellis began to clean the spill, a senior vice president approached from behind and slipped slightly on the edge of the damp area. Though he didn't fall, the scuff on his leather shoe became the story of the day. Ellis was summoned to HR not for reprimand, but for a procedure review on safety signage. He was given a laminated printout on the proper cone placement distance ratio. No one mentioned who spilled the coffee. By midday, the air conditioning on the executive floor shifted. An abrupt drop in temperature sent a chill through the halls. Ellis was called to inspect the vents. When he removed the grate above the receptionist desk, he discovered that someone had stuffed it with paper towels soaked in eucalyptus oil. It was an irritant meant to cause sneezing, coughing, discomfort. Complaints had already flooded in from employees who blamed poor maintenance. Ellis replaced the vent filter, cleaned the ducts, and left quietly. That afternoon, Langston Dyer held a walking strategy session around the 42nd floor. Trailed by 3 interns and a junior VP, he made a show of pointing out attention to detail failures in the environment: dust on the hallway trim, a hairline crack in a floor tile, a faint streak on the conference glass. As they approached Ellis, who was kneeling to realign a heating grate, Langston stopped. He gestured dramatically to Ellis's back, then whispered to his group in a tone just loud enough for the words to carry. "There's dedication," he said, "or there's camouflage. Either way, you won't see the difference unless you're looking from the top." The group laughed. The youngest intern, uncomfortable, looked down. Langston noticed and shot him a glare. "This is regalia," he continued. "We don't just shine, we blind." Ellis stood and moved aside. No reaction, no words, only his notepad, updated later under a new line titled "Mockery as Measurement." Before the end of the workday, Ellis was assigned a new temporary task: preparing the executive break room for an early morning client event. The assignment came from Lena Brooks in HR with an attached list of expectations: polished counters, flawless fixtures, floral arrangements, imported, not local. Even the fruit bowl had precise color rules: no bruising, no overripe skins. Ellis worked into the evening alone, aligning place settings, restocking sugar packets, and polishing the ceramic cups until they glinted beneath the halogen lights. As he finished, he discovered a faint chalk line drawn under the table across the tiled floor. Curious, he followed it and found it continued around the perimeter of the room in an unbroken circuit. Written near the end of the line in red marker were the words, "Stay inside your role." The next morning, when he arrived to clean, the break room had been used already. Coffee grinds were smeared across the counter. A banana peel lay flattened near the trash bin, and the fruit bowl had been overturned. One orange had burst open on impact, its pulp clinging to the grout. His arrangement had been dismantled. He cleaned the room in silence. He did not complain. He did not ask who had done it. But in his notebook, he drew the break room's layout. Underneath it, he wrote, "Precision attracts chaos." The metal door clicked and creaked open, but what greeted him inside was unexpected. The space had been rearranged. His rags, previously folded in color-coded stacks, were now mixed in random order. The mop heads had been removed from their hooks and thrown into a bucket of bleach water that hadn't been there the day before. His log clipboard was missing, and his timesheet had been reprinted and taped to the wall, with his name crossed out in red marker and replaced with a scrawled version. E. Garbage. Ellis stood still for a moment, letting his eyes sweep the room without reacting. Then he stepped inside and began the quiet process of restoring order. When he opened his locker, he found that even his uniform had been tampered with. His spare shirt had been stretched and partially soaked in some kind of brown fluid, likely coffee, and folded to appear intact until touched. A folded napkin sat on top of the ruined fabric with a single word scribbled in pen: promotion. Ellis refolded the shirt, placed it in a disposal bag, and changed into his only remaining clean set. He did not report the incident. Instead, he returned to his notebook. He sat on the bench beside the utility panel and wrote a single line under the day's date, They're trying to erase the name before the man. At 8 a.m., the day took a sharper turn. As Ellis moved to clean the reception desk area, he noticed a new addition to the wall across from the executive elevators. A mounted canvas had been installed, branded in Regalia's signature black and gold colors. It was a large plaque titled "The Team Behind the Scenes," and it featured headshots of all non-management personnel. The custodial team was represented on the bottom row. But instead of Ellis's photo, a cartoon image had been placed in the frame, a crude drawing of a man with a mop for a head, smiling with X's for eyes. The badge underneath read, "The Grime Whisperer." His real name was nowhere to be seen. Ellis stared at the wall for a long moment before someone walked past and clapped him on the shoulder. It was Devin Marks, grinning like a child who had just seen his prank finally displayed in a museum. "That's you, right?" Devin said with a smirk. "They wanted a team mascot. You got the role." Ellis turned away without a word and resumed cleaning. Behind him, Devin laughed louder than necessary and walked toward the coffee lounge. By mid-morning, things escalated. In a scheduled staff presentation for cross-departmental integration, Ellis was assigned to manage refreshments and cleanup. The room filled with upper-tier analysts and project heads. On the whiteboard at the front, a joke poll had been scribbled in the margins, most likely to write a memoir no one reads, with a tally board. Ellis's name appeared 3 times. He never saw who added the votes. During the presentation, Langston Dyer made a casual reference to overambitious maintenance staff, drawing laughter from the audience. Lena Brooks leaned toward him and whispered something that made them both laugh harder. Ellis, crouched behind the catering cart, paused only for a moment before rearranging the tea boxes. After the session ended and the room cleared out, Ellis noticed a scrap of paper left under a chair. It read, "What does EG stand for? Extra garbage." He folded the paper and slid it into the pocket of his uniform. He never stopped collecting. That afternoon, when he entered the executive washroom to restock supplies, he found that his cleaning locker had been unlocked again. This time, someone had taken his gloves and replaced them with 2 left-handed ones. In permanent marker, the inside cuff of each glove had been labeled wrong again. Even more telling, the schedule posted on the back of the door had been altered. His name had been scratched out of 3 slots and replaced with a printed sticker that read Subject 42B. He looked at the label for a full 10 seconds before reaching for his pen. In his notebook, under the subheading Surveillance Patterns, he wrote, "They've stopped mocking the role. Now they mock the identity." Near the end of the day, Ellis returned to his locker to store his notepad, but this time the lock jammed. After forcing it open with a flathead screwdriver, he discovered the interior had been rearranged again. Taped across the back wall was a newspaper clipping, dated from 5 years earlier, about a failed janitorial services contractor who had filed for bankruptcy after a mismanaged payroll scandal. The article was unrelated to him in every way, but someone had circled the man's name, Eugene Gita, and underlined a quote, "You clean floors long enough, and people forget you ever stood for anything." Ellis removed the clipping and tore it precisely down the center before throwing it away. What bothered him wasn't the crude comparison, but the precision of the timing. Someone had dug through files, chosen a name close to his own, and used it to frame a message, "Disappear." Ellis ended the day beneath the building again, seated at his makeshift desk. He opened the safe in the wall and pulled out a second notebook, the mirror copy of everything he had recorded above. Names, timestamps, audio transcripts, photocopied schedules. Below, it was a directive to report to the main atrium at 8 a.m. sharp for facility integration. He knew the term was vague, intentionally so. Ellis placed his notebook in the hidden compartment behind the storage shelf, tucked a small recording device into the upper hem of his shirt collar, and began his early rounds. At 7:59 a.m., he stood at the edge of the marble steps near the glass elevator. A row of executives had gathered behind a velvet rope that had never existed before. A sign rested on a silver stand reading, "Employee Culture Showcase." A makeshift stage had been assembled in the center of the atrium where foot traffic was heaviest, flanked by company banners and a PA system. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle around the stage, filled with associates, managers, and a few interns, all thumbing through branded pamphlets. Langston Dyer took the microphone as if stepping onto a spotlighted TED Talk. His voice boomed across the atrium, full of fake warmth and thinly veiled mockery. He welcomed everyone to what he called a spontaneous celebration of the little people who keep the building functional. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some chuckled. Others stared in confusion. Ellis stood still. Langston continued by introducing a new initiative, the Humble Hero Award, presented to the employee who demonstrates silent service, visible loyalty, and measurable humility. As he spoke, Lena Brooks approached Ellis from the side and handed him a plastic crown, the kind found in children's party stores, and a sash that read Mr. Modesty. She gestured for him to step onto the stage. Ellis's face did not move. He stepped forward as instructed, climbed the platform, and stood beneath the glare of overhead lights. Langston stretched an arm around Ellis's shoulders and held the microphone between them. "Now this man," Langston said, "has been with us for weeks and never asked for a thing. Not even dignity. That, folks, is commitment." The audience laughed unevenly. Some clapped awkwardly. Ellis stood there, expression neutral, the plastic crown now slightly off-center on his head. One of the marketing assistants raised a phone and took a picture. Others followed. Ellis knew those photos would be shared in private chats, captioned with creative insults. His body felt rigid, each heartbeat a distant thud in his ears. Then Langston stepped aside and gestured toward a large display screen behind the stage. A slideshow began to play. It opened with footage taken from security cameras. Ellis mopping, Ellis wiping glass, Ellis kneeling near overflowing bins. Over each clip, someone had edited sarcastic titles like "Elegance in Elbow Grease" and "The Legend of the Leftover Sandwich." Laughter built slowly. A few employees tried to cover their mouths. One in turn shook his head, unable to contain his grin. The video ended with a freeze frame of Ellis bending over to clean under a sink, zoomed in for effect, with bold letters reading, "Backbone of the company." The room erupted. Langston handed Ellis a laminated certificate marked with gold cursive that read "Silent Champion," signed in black ink by a name Ellis had never seen before. He accepted it, held it briefly, then lowered it to his side. Lena gave him a pat on the back like he was a dog who had just rolled over on command. He was dismissed without a word. As he stepped off the stage, Sean Geller called out, "Speech, speech." Another round of laughter followed. Ellis walked past them all, through the elevator door that had just opened, the certificate still in hand. When the doors closed, he let out a breath, calm but measured, and removed the device from his collar. Every word had been captured. Later that day, the cruelty deepened. At lunchtime, he entered the cafeteria to retrieve a replacement mop head stored in the supply cabinet just beyond the serving line. As he crossed the floor, a tray of food was accidentally bumped from the edge of a table, its contents spilling across the path in front of him. Pasta sauce, red and sticky, splashed across his boots and pants. A silence followed. Then someone yelled, "Oops, clean up on aisle humiliation." The voice sounded like Devin. Ellis didn't look up. He bent, collected the discarded tray, and placed it back on the table. The sauce clung to his pant leg like blood. He moved to the cabinet, collected the mop head, and returned the same way he came. The crowd parted, but kept watching. Whispers followed him out. After lunch, a company-wide email was circulated from HR titled "Highlighting Unsung Heroes." It included a photo of Ellis on stage with the crown and sash, captioned with a message from Lena. "Let's all learn from this example of silent dignity." Some employees responded with praise. Others replied with memes and GIFs. The thread was locked after 2 hours, but not before someone altered the image and replaced the sash text with "King of Clean." The new version circulated via unofficial channels by evening. That night, Ellis sat behind the hidden panel again. He removed the laminated certificate from his bag, examined it under the desk lamp, then sliced it cleanly into 4 pieces and placed it into a plastic sleeve labeled Stage 4. He He played the audio from his recording device, cataloging timestamps and matching them with calendar entries from the public schedule. He attached the cafeteria incident to a file labeled Red Pattern Events. Then he turned to his secondary notebook, the mirror log. There, he wrote a line under the day's entry. Public shaming disguised as praise reveals more about the abuser than the target. Applause is the loudest form of cruelty when it's hollow. He spent the next 2 hours reviewing digital personnel files from a secure port in the wall. Yet he moved with the same silent rhythm, pushing his cart with clean wheels, a new mop, and a restocked notebook. When he reached the 42nd floor, something was different. The smell. It wasn't chemical or metallic. It was human, sweat, adrenaline, and tension. As he turned the corner near the executive lounge, he saw why. 2 junior associates, one white, one black, stood opposite a cluster of executives, among them Langston Dyer and Lena Brooks. The white associate, Caleb, was waving a printed report. The black associate, Jamal, was silent, arms crossed tightly across his chest. The air was taut with accusation. Langston's voice cut through it with that same arrogant confidence he reserved for boardrooms and private scoldings. He was accusing Jamal of delaying a client deliverable, pointing to a missing timestamp on a project log. Jamal tried to speak, but Lena cut him off with a dismissive wave, claiming the data inconsistency indicated negligence. Caleb, eyes downcast, said nothing. Ellis stood just around the corner, partially hidden by the vending alcove, listening. He had cleaned Jamal's desk area earlier that week. He remembered the print logs. He knew Jamal hadn't missed a deadline. He knew because he had scanned the log sheet into his own archive 2 days prior. The timestamp error had been made by Caleb and corrected by Jamal within minutes. But the correction never made it to the report. Somehow, that version had been purged. As Ellis resumed his route, he watched Jamal walk away from the group slowly, stiff with restrained fury. The next day, his name disappeared from the associate tracker. A rumor circulated that he had resigned voluntarily. Ellis noted the change. At lunchtime, Ellis was scrubbing down the lower-level employee lounge when he noticed a series of photos on the new culture board, an initiative Lena had introduced just 2 weeks earlier. Photos of employee volunteering events, holiday parties, and team-building exercises were pinned with captions. Most featured white employees. The few black or brown faces were only visible at the edges, blurred or cropped. One photo caught Ellis's attention. It was from the culture event last quarter, a group shot of the floor's project team at a local charity build. In the front row stood Devin, smiling broadly with a paintbrush. Directly behind him, barely visible, was Jamal mid-step, 1 foot caught in motion as if leaving the frame. The caption read, "Devin leads the charge." No mention of Jamal. No tag. Ellis stared at it for a long moment, then took out his notebook and wrote, "Erasure begins with a crop." Later that afternoon, Ellis entered the executive break room just as 2 interns were leaving. They were whispering about something called the mosaic. When they saw Ellis, they quieted and slipped out. Inside, taped to the wall behind the espresso machine, was a collage of Polaroid photos. Most showed snapshots of employees in casual moments, eating, laughing, huddled in impromptu meetings. But among them were 3 altered photos. One showed Ellis from behind, mop in hand, with the caption "Wallflower of the Year." Another showed Jamal with the lighting edited to darken the image, captioned "Shadow Ops." The third had no caption. It was a hallway photo of the janitor's closet, the door ajar, with a shadow visible inside. Ellis removed that one and slid it into his notebook. No one said anything about it later. Around 3 p.m., a water leak was reported on the 41st floor near the Internal Operations Office. Ellis was dispatched. When he arrived, he found a soaked file folder inside the janitor's closet drain. Someone had shoved it there intentionally. The folder was marked Q4 Internal Compliance Holds. The contents were blurred from the water, but legible enough to read partial email exchanges. One mentioned a delay in processing promotion requests for non-white employees due to client optics. Another outlined a soft barrier policy for upward visibility. Ellis photographed each page before submitting the report to maintenance. He made a note of the last person to access that floor, Lena Brooks, 1 hour prior, according to the elevator logs. The deeper pattern was becoming clearer. Racial bias wasn't just present. It was being cultivated, disguised as policy, reinforced through subtle maneuvers and silence. That evening, as Ellis exited through the back corridor, he passed by a large digital display near the lobby. The screen cycled through images and internal headlines. One caught his eye: Promoting Diversity Through Inclusion, a regalia success story. It showed a staged photo of an ethnically mixed team sitting in the main conference room. Ellis recognized the image. It had been taken during an emergency drill, not a strategy meeting. None of the employees in the photo held senior roles. The headline was a lie, but a beautiful one. He stood there, letting the lie wash over him, memorizing the placement of each person in the frame. That night, in his hidden workspace, he updated his data grid. He created a new column: Constructed Optics versus Lived Experience. Under it, he recorded the Jamal incident, the erasure from the culture board, the photos in the mosaic, the Q4 compliance folder, and the staged lobby image. Each was categorized, labeled, and cross-referenced. A pattern had formed. The cruelty was no longer personal. It was systemic, calculated. Ellis wrote in his log, "The difference between racism and culture is repetition. One is a moment, the other is tradition." The next morning, an anonymous message appeared on the break room whiteboard. It read, "Keep your head down or you'll be next." It was gone within an hour, wiped clean by the time Ellis returned with his mop. But he had already photographed it. The air on the 42nd floor felt tighter than usual. When he entered the janitor's supply room, the door hesitated, then unlocked with a slow mechanical click that sounded delayed, artificial. Inside, he noticed the storage shelf had been moved 6 inches to the left. Someone had been inside. The hidden compartment was untouched, but the paper inventory log he kept was missing. In its place was a company-issued checklist printed in bold font: Daily Report Compliance Custodial. At the bottom was a handwritten instruction: all logs must now be stored centrally. There was no signature. Ellis stared at the form, then placed it in his notebook. He wrote beneath it, "Microscopic oversight is a symptom of fear." At 8:45 a.m., while cleaning the executive conference room between sessions, he noticed a small camera dome newly installed in the corner above the HVAC panel. It hadn't been there the day before. The LED light blinked blue once every 5 seconds. The placement was not standard for facility cameras. It was angled downward, positioned to capture not the faces of executives, but the floor and anyone cleaning it. He stepped back slowly, then reached into his supply cart and retrieved a hand towel, placing it neatly over the lens before returning to his mopping. 10 minutes later, the camera light blinked red, then turned off. Ellis did not remove the towel. At 10 a.m., the elevators stalled on his floor 3 separate times while he attempted to travel between levels for routine sanitation tasks. Each time, the system issued a voice alert: restricted access, floor lock engaged. Other employees reported no malfunctions. Ellis submitted a maintenance report through the internal portal, but it vanished from the submission history after he logged out. He wrote in his notebook, "Restriction precedes erasure. Deny movement, deny relevance." At lunchtime, he passed through the cafe on the 2nd floor, not to eat, but to check the vendor closets for refills. On the whiteboard posted near the serving area was a new team game chart labeled Culture Olympics. It was an unofficial challenge created by interns and approved by HR as team building. The tasks listed were innocuous on the surface: catch someone being helpful, praise a coworker for fast turnaround, document a funny moment at work. But next to the list was a running tally with color-coded names. Some had stars, others had check marks. Ellis's name did not appear. But beneath the section titled Most Memorable Moment, someone had drawn a stick figure wearing a crown, holding a mop, with the caption Squeegee King. The drawing was surrounded by a lopsided throne and 3 coffee cups arranged as jewels. People passed by, laughing softly. No one erased it. At 1 p.m., Ellis entered the HR wing to replace a filter in the auxiliary air unit. As he moved through the hallway, he passed Lena Brooks's office. The door was open, voices inside. She was speaking to someone from operations, discussing Ellis by name. They didn't know he was in earshot. She said he was quietly destabilizing group morale, that his silence made people uncomfortable, that some were starting to interpret it as judgment. She didn't have evidence, but she'd suggested soft monitoring protocols to assess his fit. The other voice agreed, said that once trust was questioned, it didn't take much to validate concerns. Ellis froze, back pressed to the wall outside the supply closet. He wrote later, "When silence threatens power, suspicion replaces respect." That afternoon, while cleaning the executive restrooms, Ellis discovered his notebook had been moved. He had locked it in the compartment behind the mop shelf as always. But when he opened it, the top page was folded backward. Someone had read it. The ink at the edge of the page had a slight smudge, likely from skin contact. He inspected the safe nearby. No tampering, but the trust had been broken. He replaced the notebook with a decoy, a blank journal with simulated scribbles and unrelated notes. He moved the real one to a new location behind a ventilation panel 2 floors below. From that point forward, everything he recorded was transcribed twice, once in decoy, once in truth. By 4:30 p.m., he returned to the janitorial closet to find a printed survey sheet taped to the inside door. It was titled Behavioral Transparency Survey and listed anonymous quotes gathered from unnamed employees. One quote read, "He's always watching, but never speaking. It's unsettling." Another said, "Sometimes I think he's smarter than he lets on. Makes me nervous." A third said simply, "Why is he even here?" Ellis removed the paper, folded it, and placed it between pages in the decoy notebook. Then he wrote in the real one, "Isolation is not accidental. It is engineered. When you can't be broken, they try to make you invisible." At 6:10 p.m., while walking through the deserted operations wing, he passed the wellness room and noticed a light on. Inside was a new installation, a suggestion board titled, "What Makes a Regalia Hero?" Cards were pinned with slogans, ideas, affirmations. Some said things like taking initiative or great time management. But one card, written in thin black ink, simply said, "Knowing your place and staying in it." No name, just the message. Ellis removed it and slid it into the same sleeve as the survey quotes. He understood what this stage was. This wasn't just about mockery or public embarrassment anymore. It was about control through disconnection. They were trying to surround him with silence not of his choosing, but of enforced distance. If others feared association, if the air between him and them thickened with suspicion, then whatever he saw, no one else would stand to confirm. His existence could be explained away, his evidence denied. Ellis received a system-generated alert from a flagged sensor inside the HVAC crawlspace of the 3rd sublevel. The alert was not part of his usual notification list. It came through a hidden route, an old access channel once used by internal tech engineers during the building's initial construction. Ellis had quietly reactivated that line 6 months ago and had been monitoring it since. That morning, it had come alive for the first time in weeks. The alert read, "Pressure fluctuation, storage unit B3. Ellis excused himself from his assigned floor, entered the elevator using his override keycard, and descended without triggering the internal movement report system. He moved past the archives, past the engineering bulkhead, into the disused crawl space that had once housed temporary wiring during early system installations. The crawl space was narrow and dark, lined with cables and junction boxes, most of them long since dead. But at the far end was a panel bolted to the wall, painted over in a color slightly different than the surrounding area. Ellis reached into his utility pouch, retrieved a slim access tool, and twisted the 4 bolts one by one. The panel fell away. Inside was a recessed compartment with an old metallic storage box the size of a file drawer. He removed it carefully and set it on the floor, opening it to reveal a cache of records, handwritten logs, analog tapes, old ID cards, and most critically, a leather-bound ledger. The name embossed across the cover was S. D. Regis. Ellis opened it and scanned the entries. They were maintenance logs from the building's earliest operational months, but what they contained extended far beyond sink leaks or broken lights. Each entry included notations about conversations overheard, employee behavior summaries, and internal memos not meant to be archived. The handwriting belonged to the building's original head of operations, a man who had mysteriously resigned and left no forwarding address. One entry caught Ellis's attention. December 8th. Concerns raised about pattern of exit interviews, primarily affecting non-white staff. Suggestions of falsified HR assessments. Must investigate further. Another, dated 3 weeks later, said, 3 reports scrubbed. Management denied knowledge. My clearance was downgraded without notice. This is a system, not an error. The final entry in the book was short. If this ledger is found, understand, silence here is not passive. It is enforced, and it always protects the same names. Ellis read every word, then added his own note at the back. Found 6:17 a.m. confirms what was suspected. The structure was built to silence and shape. I will not be. He carefully resealed the box, memorized every item inside, then took only the ledger with him. It was time. At noon, Ellis returned to the janitorial closet and retrieved a packet of documents he had compiled over the last 7 months. Among them were altered schedules, incident reports, erased timestamps, modified personnel records, surveillance data, and excerpts from board minutes indicating procedural violations tied directly to Langston Dyer and Lena Brooks. He placed the packet in an inter-office envelope marked Private Transfer Board Oversight and slipped it into the internal chute that bypassed floor-level sorting. He then accessed the secured digital node in his hidden chamber and uploaded the same data set, along with the scanned ledger pages, to a private mirror server built from company hardware during his nightly shifts. The system sent no alert. The node appeared empty to any routine system check. At 2:03 p.m., he began a time sequence. A secondary message embedded in the internal Regalia network calendar was triggered, inviting 12 board members and 2 outside compliance consultants to an unscheduled system review at 6 p.m. in Conference Room Alpha. The message appeared to come from the administrative executive's address, another access route quietly mirrored by Ellis 6 weeks ago. He returned to his floor without a change in demeanor, his notebook once again clipped to the cart, his uniform sleeves slightly frayed from wear. Around him, the rhythm of the day played out as usual. Langston passed him twice without acknowledgement. Devon nodded once and smirked. Lena, moving briskly with a coffee in hand, didn't notice him at all. But everything had shifted. At 5 p.m., Ellis re-entered the hidden chamber and activated the monitoring script. The system displayed motion sensors in the boardroom. One by one, individuals began to arrive. They sat, confused, watching as the wall display activated automatically. No one touched the controls. The lights dimmed. Then the slideshow began. The first image showed the Q4 compliance memo, highlighting language about performance risk optics. The second was the staged culture board photo with erased identifiers. The third was the edited video of Ellis receiving his false Humble Hero award, juxtaposed with raw surveillance footage that clearly showed the mocking context. When Ellis arrived at the designated room, it was already unlocked. Inside stood a man he recognized from photos in old quarterly reviews. Daniel Harthway, former internal compliance lead, officially retired the year prior. But Harthway's presence here now told Ellis everything he needed to know. He hadn't retired. He had been removed or hidden or perhaps volunteered for silence in exchange for security. His eyes showed the exhaustion of someone who had tried once and failed, then chosen self-preservation. Harthway didn't speak at first. Instead, he handed Ellis a packet of papers, sealed, unmarked, fresh with ink. Inside were full minutes of 3 prior closed-door board sessions, each revealing discussions that aligned with Ellis's own findings. Concerns about race-based performance optics, quiet terminations of high-potential minority staff under veiled cause, misuse of evaluation protocols, and, most notably, the systematic suppression of any reports filed by non-management personnel that indicated bias or abuse. Ellis read quickly, taking mental snapshots. Hathaway finally said one thing, not a whisper, not a confession, just a resigned acknowledgement. "You did what I couldn't." Then he turned and left, leaving Ellis alone with the evidence. By 8 a.m., Ellis stood once again on the 42nd floor, dressed not in his janitorial uniform, but in the executive black suit that had hung for a year untouched in a locker embedded behind the false wall in the records room. His badge clipped to his belt was different now, embossed, encrypted, official. The name on it was not Ellis Granger. It read Thomas Calloway, Director of Ethics and Internal Investigation, Regalia Industries. For over 14 months, Thomas had lived under an assumed name, silently witnessing the daily operations of Regalia from the lowest rung of its social ladder. He had been tasked with investigating not a single event, but a pattern, an entrenched culture of racial contempt, institutional bias, and protected power masquerading as corporate structure. His superiors outside the building, overseen by a federal contract review body, had given him one directive: confirm the pattern, collect the proof, then expose it not with accusation, but with their own words, their own actions, their own systems. Now the time for silence had passed. At 8:30 a.m., a mandatory internal conference notification was pushed to all devices. Emergency Compliance Address. Conference Room Alpha. No exceptions. Attendance required for executive staff, board members, and department heads. Employees whispered. Phones buzzed. Schedules shifted. No one knew what it meant. Some assumed it was a drill, others a restructuring announcement. At 9 a.m. sharp, the room was full. Lights dimmed. No speaker stood at the front. Instead, the wall screen flickered to life again, same as the night before, but now in real time. A live feed appeared of Thomas, formerly Ellis, walking down the main corridor toward the room. Whispers grew louder. Recognition began to spark in eyes across the crowd. Some frowned in confusion. Others shifted uncomfortably. Devin's jaw dropped. Lena sat frozen, eyes fixed on the screen. Langston leaned forward, elbows on the table, expression tight. The doors opened and Thomas entered. He stood at the front without taking a seat. He didn't speak. He held up a single sheet of paper, the ledger's final entry, now laminated, and placed it on the podium. Behind him, the screen shifted to show slide after slide of internal documentation, manipulated records, erasure of timestamps, falsified performance notes, surveillance footage, and unedited audio files of HR meetings where terms like optical risk and unpredictable temperament were repeatedly used to justify blocking advancement for Black and brown employees. Then came the photo comparisons. Altered images used in culture boards, misleading captions, and controlled visibility marketing. Faces cropped. Names omitted. The audience was silent. Next came financial data, bonus allocations favoring certain demographics, retention offers extended only to specific profiles, and early retirement packages offered to outspoken dissenters with veiled legal threats. Thomas said nothing still. His eyes scanned a room, locking briefly with Langston's, then Lena's. Neither spoke. Their faces were pale. The final slide read, "Erasure isn't passive. It is designed." A message followed below it. "This pattern has been documented. Its source has been traced. Action is now in motion." The screen went black. Thomas stepped down from the podium and walked past the front row. No applause followed. No one moved. He exited the room, re-entering the hallway with the same calm steps he'd walked every morning in silence. Only now his presence was no longer invisible. Behind him, the internal investigation portal went live, listing names, dates, and points of infraction, protected by federal security protocols and legal shielding. Staff began receiving direct notifications. Some stared at their screens in disbelief. Others left their desks quietly. HR executives gathered in whispered clusters. At 10:30 a.m., Lena Brooks was escorted from the building. At 11:10 a.m., Langston Dyer's office was locked pending formal inquiry. At 11:58 a.m., Devin's ID badge was deactivated. At 6:45 a.m. the following morning, two black sedans arrived outside Regalia's main entrance. Men in federal compliance jackets and neutral-faced legal observers stepped into the lobby, bypassing reception and heading directly for the executive elevators. No explanations were offered. They didn't need to give any. The building's security system had already been updated overnight to reflect a new protocol implemented by Oversight Command. That morning, Langston Dyer arrived 15 minutes later than usual, expecting a chance to speak, to argue, to clarify misunderstandings. Instead, he was met by two compliance officers who calmly asked him to surrender his badge and escort him to his office. There, they presented a breakdown of his misappropriated budget line items, connections to department-level manipulation of bonus pathways, and 3 separate incidents in which his own digital signature had been used to block performance evaluations that would have advanced minority employees. His face, usually firm and fixed in confidence, began to lose its color. He tried to explain. He referenced chain of command ambiguities, claimed miscommunication, even suggested possible sabotage. But the evidence was exact, time-stamped, and already validated. Langston was removed from the premises at 8:02 a.m. Lena Brooks's reckoning arrived not long after. As head of HR, her legacy had been built on fostering a professional culture while quietly insulating decision-makers from the fallout of bias-based practices. But the evidence against her was not just procedural, it was personal. Dozens of documented complaints had never been processed. Files had been quietly altered or deleted. Recommendations for promotions had been redirected to individuals with safer optics. More damaging still, Lena had led internal image campaigns to present Regalia as an inclusion-forward institution using staged events, crop photos, and selected narratives while deliberately excluding the very employees the campaigns claimed to support. When shown her own voice and audio recordings, using phrases like "not the right aesthetic for leadership" and "we have to be conscious of our client-facing identity," she had no defense. At 9:17 a.m., her removal was finalized. The Internal Communications Board posted a formal announcement that afternoon. Effective immediately, Regalia Industries has begun a comprehensive restructuring of its leadership team to align with federal compliance directives and ongoing ethics reviews. In the hours that followed, the building changed. Offices that had once been off-limits were suddenly accessible. Meeting rooms were reassigned. Executive lounges were stripped of personal artifacts. Desks were cleared, nameplates removed, and silence returned to places once filled with casual cruelty and private dominance. But the consequences did not stop at the doors of executives. Devin Marks was called to the lower conference suite at 11:45 a.m. He arrived smug, even casual, unaware of the depth to which his participation had been cataloged. Screens displayed footage of him mocking Ellis, now known as Thomas, engaging in humiliating behavior, planting false rumors, and manipulating intern perceptions through racist innuendos. In one sequence, his voice could be heard referring to Ellis as the invisible stain, laughing behind his hand. Another clip revealed Devin coaching a junior analyst to keep the profile clean when engaging with black associates, a phrase he defended as harmless. The compliance officers were unmoved. Devin's access was revoked by 12:10 p.m. His dismissal was not public, but word spread fast. The air on each floor shifted. Employees who once laughed nervously at cruelty no longer found it funny. A memo issued internally explained the violations and outlined a temporary monitoring structure for ongoing behavior evaluations. Staff were told this was not a pause, but a permanent shift. Meanwhile, those who had suffered in silence began to speak. Jamal, the associate forced out for a fabricated error, was formally invited to return under a new role, Senior Systems Advisor. His reentry was quiet but symbolic, a message that the system that once erased him had now been forced to acknowledge its failure. Other names surfaced too: former interns, assistants, long overlooked analysts. Each had filed reports, raised questions, or simply endured and moved on without recognition. Now they were being contacted, their stories verified, their reputations restored. Regalia's internal message board, once filled with promotional fluff and weekly team-building updates, now hosted daily transparency logs, summaries of investigations, status reports, and formal apologies delivered to those harmed. Staff were encouraged to read, respond, and engage. Some did. Others avoided the screen entirely, unable to confront the guilt of their own complicity. A new program was announced, Oversight Echo, an anonymized platform for employees to document ethical concerns, monitored externally and protected from internal influence. Every office had a screen installed. Every floor received its own access code. Compliance teams remained embedded in the building, not as visitors, but as new oversight authorities. And through it all, Thomas remained silent in public. He returned to no podium, gave no speeches, filed no messages. He resumed his presence on the floors, walking quietly, not in a uniform, but in simple dress, as if to remind the space of what it had once ignored. People greeted him now, unsure of what to say, some offering awkward apologies, others avoiding his gaze. He did not respond with anger. He did not lecture. He simply walked, clipboard in hand, still recording, still present, a living reminder that silence does not equal absence, and that dignity, once mocked, can return with force. The most visible change came not through structure, but in tone. Conversations shifted. Meetings that once held only a single voice now paused for input. Jokes that used to fill break rooms with unchallenged cruelty were no longer spoken aloud. Some who had remained neutral tried to rewrite their past roles. They claimed discomfort with what they saw, but admitted doing nothing. Their honesty was noted. Their future depended on action, not confession. Regalia's board, facing external scrutiny and stock pressure, issued a formal public statement. It acknowledged the systemic issues uncovered by the internal ethics investigation and pledged transparency, restitution, and reform. The aftermath of exposure was not a return to silence, but a redefinition of it. Regalia Industries no longer operated under the invisible weight of its own hypocrisy. It now breathed a different kind of air, one not yet free from history, but thick with awareness. The changes had not come swiftly, nor without resistance. There were murmurs in backrooms, quiet apologies that didn't land quite right, and strategic rewrites of past intentions. But the foundation had shifted, and with that, so had the building's soul. Thomas Calloway, once known only as Ellis Granger the Janitor, continued his quiet traversal of the space he had once used to observe. He did not claim a corner office. He did not request a promotion, a raise, or recognition. Instead, he created a new protocol housed within Regalia's ethics department. It was called Reflection Analysis. Its mission was simple: to prevent the birth of the silence he had exposed. The protocol trained select employees, regardless of rank, to monitor for invisible patterns, erasure, bias, coercion, and manipulation hiding behind procedures and expectations. It was not punitive nor performative. It was preventive. The system encouraged vulnerability in reporting and required monthly sessions not led by HR, but by staff from every level, ensuring stories reached where statistics could not. It took months before anyone trusted it. But trust, like rot, spreads when left undisturbed. The program eventually grew. One morning, nearly 6 months after the exposure, Thomas entered the employee lounge to find someone had pinned a note to the board, written in neat block letters. "I never spoke up. I should have. I see it now." Beneath it, a second note appeared by the afternoon. "Thank you for proving it wasn't in my head." Soon after, employees began to leave short testimonials not on official channels, but on post-it notes tucked inside the pages of books in the shared office library. They wrote about moments when they felt invisible, about jokes that left them stained with shame, about being told to be grateful when what they wanted was fairness. None of the notes were signed. None needed to be. The building, once filled with rituals of hierarchy, became quieter in its self-importance and louder in its awareness. The culture that once rewarded cruelty disguised as cleverness now began to reward courage shown in quiet actions. Thomas was present through it all, not directing, but listening, guiding when asked, and correcting where necessary. He remained a witness, not because he had to, but because he knew that power never leaves willingly. It mutates, hides, seeks new forms. The system must be watched, not once, but always. Those who had once mocked him began to show change. Devin, now working under a probationary review clause, entered a mentorship program designed for former violators of policy. His first months were silent, marked by awkwardness and a visible discomfort that could not be hidden behind humor. But then, something shifted. One afternoon, he requested to join a discussion circle not required of his department. In that room, he listened as a junior employee shared how watching someone be humiliated affected her sense of safety, even when she wasn't the target. Devin said nothing, but the next week, he returned. Over time, he began to speak, not to defend himself, but to understand. His jokes became less about performance, more about disarming tension. He stopped talking over others. He stopped using irony to mask discomfort. He stopped trying to be seen and started trying to see. Lena Brooks did not return to Regalia. Her departure had been final. But in a gesture no one expected, she sent a letter, addressed not to the board, not to Thomas, but to the building itself. It read, simply, "I believed I was protecting culture. I see now I was protecting comfort. I was afraid of being powerless, and so I participated in making others feel small. That is not leadership. That is fear. I will spend the rest of my time unlearning what power taught me." The letter was posted on the wall next to the employee suggestion box. No one removed it. Some employees scoffed, unsure of her sincerity. Others read it twice, then walked away silently. But the building remembered. Langston Dyer, under investigation and barred from any future leadership role, disappeared from the industry entirely. His name, once synonymous with Regalia's boldness and drive, was now a cautionary tale in business ethics classes and leadership development modules. His legacy had not ended in disgrace, but in exposure. And in exposure, there is no corner left to hide. Thomas often said little about any of them. He did not seek retribution. He had never sought humiliation in return. His purpose had been truth, not revenge. In one meeting, he explained it best. Retribution teaches fear. Truth teaches transformation. Only one of them builds anything that lasts. The building, once rigid with invisible rules and silent rankings, now bore physical reminders of its journey. The culture board was gone. In its place stood the ledger wall, a framed sequence of entries taken from the original ledger found in the sublevel, alongside transcribed quotes from Ellis's notebook. One read, "The ground beneath us is not uneven by accident. It was built that way." Another, "Watch, listen, endure, then reveal." New employees were encouraged to read them during orientation, not as a ritual, but as a reminder. Thomas spent less time in the spotlight and more time in the forgotten places, the storage closets, the ventilation shafts, the unused stairwells, quiet spaces where neglect once thrived. He said those spaces told him more about a place than its mission statement ever could. One afternoon, he found a custodian sitting alone in the back hallway, holding a broken broom and a nervous expression. When Thomas asked what had happened, the custodian explained that someone from mid-level management had accused him of being slow, lazy, and incompetent, all because he'd taken an extra minute to avoid making noise near a meeting room. Thomas nodded, took the broken broom, and escorted the custodian to the office of the man who made the accusation. He did not shout. He did not issue threats. He simply handed the broken broom to the man and asked him to sweep the hallway himself, in complete silence, without being seen, and without causing disruption. The manager stammered, unsure how to respond. Thomas waited. After a long pause, the man lowered his eyes and apologized. The custodian was reinstated and moved to a preferred shift. The lesson remained unspoken but deeply felt. It wasn't a show. It was a moment of reckoning, quiet, firm, and unforgettable. A year passed. Regalia Industries was no longer the same company. It still made money. It still signed contracts and delivered results. But its reputation had changed. Clients asked about its culture not as a checkbox, But as a prerequisite, new hires came in with the awareness that their actions mattered beyond performance metrics. The culture of silence had been broken, not by violence, not by spectacle, but by patience, precision, and presence. Thomas stood once more on the rooftop terrace. As the sun dipped below the skyline, the city pulsed beyond the glass, loud and alive. He held a new notebook now, this one thinner, not filled with grievances, but with notes about what could be built from the ruins of exposure. He didn't know how long he would stay. The work would never truly be done. But he knew one thing: justice was not about punishment. It was about balance, about making sure the weight others once carried was acknowledged, lifted, and never forgotten. As he looked down at the glass towers below, he thought not of revenge or regret, but of resilience. He had been called invisible. He had been made a joke. He had been erased. But in the end, he was the one who made them see. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful narratives like it, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps support these projects and keeps the storytelling going strong. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the plot twists and the character transformation? Did the ending land the way you expected? And where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment and let me know. I'd love to hear your perspective.